The old bastard's probably bare food by now. Imagine those claws tearing into his leathery skin. Serves him right for lasting this long. I bet the vultures are circling what's left of him. 3 days of exposure should have finished him off. If not, the wolves certainly have. Can you believe he still insisted on that stupid hunting tradition at his age? What a pathetic fool. Let's drink to $13.5 million each, plus those sweet mineral rights bringing us $850,000 annually. He always said we needed survival skills. How ironic those skills failed him when he needed them most. Should we send flowers to his empty casket, or is that too obvious? Those were the words my twin sons exchanged while lounging in their $6,500 per night Alaskan resort suite, believing I'd never hear them. They didn't know I was alive, crawling through the wilderness with a festering leg wound and dwindling supplies. They didn't know that the military training they'd mocked had kept me breathing when the temperature dropped below freezing. They didn't know that their old man had intercepted their text messages through a technical glitch. Messages that detailed every aspect of their plan to murder me for my $28 million fortune. I stood on that Alaskan ridge, blood seeping through my torn pants, the bitter realization colder than the wind cutting through my inadequate jacket. My own flesh and blood had calculated the exact dollar value of my death, down to the monthly pension payments they'd collect while waiting for my estate to clear probate. The satellite phone they'd sabotaged hung useless at my belt. The emergency beacon they'd accidentally dropped in the river was gone. My provisions had mysteriously dwindled to barely 2 days' worth. The tracks told the truth my heart couldn't accept. They had left with the guide, headed back to civilization without a backward glance. No search party, no rescue attempt. Just abandonment in one of the most merciless landscapes on Earth, with winter approaching and predators growing desperate for pre-hibernation meals. I slumped against a tree, exhaustion threatening to claim me. Death whispered seductively about rest, about surrender. My arthritic knees screamed with each step. The gash on my leg from an accidental slip of Michael's hunting knife throbbed relentlessly. At 70, with night falling and temperatures plummeting, my chances were slim. That's when I found it, crumpled in the bottom of my pack. A printed confirmation of the $180,000 I'd paid for this exclusive expedition, accidentally attached to a screenshot of texts between my sons. My trembling fingers smoothed the paper as I read words that scorched themselves into my soul. 3 days in that mountain forest should finish off the old bastard. Exposure or bears will do the job. Can't believe he still wanted that stupid father-son hunting tradition at his age. His fortune is split 50-50 once he's declared dead. $13.5 million each, plus the mineral rights worth $850,000 a year. The rangers won't search that area for weeks this time of year. Dad always said we needed survival skills. Ironic that his lack of them will make us rich. Let's tell everyone he wandered off confused. Early dementia is believable at his age. The pathetic old fool probably thinks we're out looking for him right now. I hope his last thoughts are realizing his own sons left him to die. Maybe wolves will find him first, save the bears the trouble of digesting that tough old meat. I've already spoken to the realtor about listing his $4.2 million Maine residence next month. His monthly pension of $22,000 will keep us comfortable while we liquidate his investment portfolio. The life insurance pays $5 million, which we can split while we wait for the estate to clear probate. My hands shook, not from cold, but from a rage I'd never experienced. Not in Vietnam when watching friends die. Not when cancer stole Elizabeth from me. This was primal, visceral fury that burned away fatigue and pain. They had calculated everything. My survival odds, asset values, probate timelines. The sons I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, had reduced me to numbers on a balance sheet. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my waterproof inner pocket. Evidence. Then I reached for my hunting knife. The one skill they'd forgotten I possessed was the will to survive when all odds said I should die. Vietnam had taught me that. Now, I would teach them. I wasn't always wealthy. After returning from Vietnam with nothing but nightmares and combat medals, I used my meager military compensation to buy land everyone considered worthless. For 6 months, I slept in my truck, conducting amateur geological surveys while professional geologists laughed at my delusions. Then I found the mineral deposits that would transform that worthless plot into the foundation of my fortune. Elizabeth came into my life when I was still struggling, a nurse who treated my malaria relapse. She loved me before the money, before the success. We waited 8 years for children, suffering through 3 miscarriages before our twin boys arrived. Michael and James were our miracles, born after we'd nearly abandoned hope. Elizabeth insisted we give them everything we'd lacked: private education, European summers, extravagant Christmas mornings with mountains of presents beneath designer trees. Perhaps that was our first mistake. I still remember their 12th birthday when I initiated our annual hunting tradition. "Boys," I'd said, presenting them with their first hunting rifles, "these mountains have provided for our family. One day, everything I own will be yours. But money comes and goes. It's the skills to survive when everything is stripped away. That's the true inheritance." They'd rolled their eyes when they thought I wasn't looking, more interested in the expensive smartphones Elizabeth had given them earlier. Still, I persisted, believing I could instill in them the values that had carried me through jungle warfare and financial uncertainty. When Elizabeth's cancer diagnosis came, the twins were 21, legal adults still behaving like entitled teenagers. She withered before our eyes, her once vibrant body betraying her ounce by ounce. On her deathbed, she'd clutched my hand and whispered, "The boys still need guidance, Richard. They're not ready for what you've built. Promise me you'll prepare them properly." I promised. For 15 years after her death, I tried to mold them into men of integrity. I included them in business decisions, taught them about investments, showed them how to track deer, build shelters, purify water. While they displayed initial aptitude, something essential never took root, that indefinable quality that separates those who build from those who merely consume. I noticed subtle changes as they approached their 30s. Investment reports appeared on their screens when I entered rooms. Conversations about my retirement became more frequent. They began suggesting luxury care facilities, just in case, though my health remained excellent. Their eyes lingered on Elizabeth's jewelry collection, my vintage car garage, the extensive property portfolio I'd built. For my 70th birthday, they suggested an Alaskan expedition. One last great adventure before you slow down. Michael handled the arrangements, insisting I spare no expense. "You deserve the best, Dad," he'd said, eyes shining with what I mistook for filial affection rather than calculated avarice. I'd embraced them before our departure, my heart swelling with pride that my sons wanted to honor our tradition. Now, alone in the wilderness with their betrayal burning in my pocket, I realized they'd weaponized my own tradition against me. Wait! Before we continue this shocking story, I have an important request for you. Our channel is dreaming of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and we can't do it without your support. This incredible journey of betrayal and survival is one of many powerful stories we share, but we need your help to keep going. Please take a second right now to hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing but means everything to us. Also, smash that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if your own children betrayed you for money? Would you seek revenge or find forgiveness? Could you survive what this father endured? Don't miss the mind-blowing conclusion to this true story. The final twist will leave you speechless. Now let's get back to discovering how this abandoned father fought his way back from certain death. The Alaskan wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. I knew this when I agreed to the trip, but I trusted my lifetime of survival training. And foolishly, I trusted my sons. Our expedition began at Northern Lights Lodge, an obscenely expensive retreat where celebrities and tech billionaires escaped the pressures of civilization. At $6,500 per night, it represented everything I'd taught the twins to avoid, wasteful luxury that contributed nothing to character. "It's your 70th, Dad," James had insisted. "Let us spoil you for once." Those first 2 days, they were uncharacteristically attentive, refilling my coffee before I asked, carrying my luggage despite my protests, checking my satellite phone to ensure it's getting proper reception. I mistook their hovering for affection rather than reconnaissance. Our guide, Tanner, was a 30-something with impressive credentials, but shifty eyes that never quite met mine. When I mentioned my military background, he seemed uncomfortable, changing the subject to the luxurious accommodations row, there than engaging with my questions about terrain and weather conditions. On our third morning, we ventured into true wilderness, a remote mountain range accessible only by helicopter. As we flew over endless forest and jagged peaks, Michael leaned over, squeezing my shoulder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he shouted over the rotor noise. "Pristine. Untouched." I nodded, failing to catch the satisfaction in his expression. Satisfaction that I now understand came from identifying my final resting place. We established base camp near a rocky outcropping. The helicopter departed with plans to return in 5 days. That night, around the campfire, my sons insisted I recount Vietnam stories they'd heard dozens of times. I obliged, not recognizing they were assessing my physical capabilities, my mental sharpness, my potential to survive what they had planned. When I retired to my tent, I overheard whispers. "He's still pretty sharp," James murmured. "Doesn't matter," Michael replied. "Nature doesn't care about sharp. Nature cares about stamina, and his is fading. Did you see how he struggled on that ridge today?" The next morning, my satellite phone mysteriously malfunctioned. James examined it, pronouncing it water-damaged. Must have been when we crossed that stream yesterday. I accepted his explanation, not noticing how he'd manipulated the battery compartment to corrode the contacts. That afternoon, my hunting rifle jammed during practice shots. Michael cleaned it, somehow ensuring it would work, just unreliably enough to be dangerous in a crisis. The emergency beacon disappeared from my pack. "Must have fallen out during our last hike, Dad. Careless of you." On our 4th day, Tanner received a suspicious radio call. His expression shifted from confusion to poorly concealed relief. "Bad news," he announced. "Family emergency back home. They're sending an extraction helicopter in 3 hours. We should all head back," I suggested, watching their reactions. "The helicopter can only safely carry 3 people plus gear from this elevation," Tanner explained, avoiding my gaze. "They'll send another tomorrow specifically for you, Mr. Warren." My sons made a theatrical show of protest. "We can't leave Dad alone." "This is unacceptable. We demand alternate arrangements." Their performance was remarkable. Had I not overheard their whispers, I might have believed their concern genuine. But something in their eyes, a glint of calculation, betrayed them. "It's fine, boys," I said, watching carefully. "I've survived worse in Vietnam. Go ahead and handle whatever emergency awaits. I'll enjoy one more day of solitude." The relief that flashed across their faces confirmed everything. As they packed, I noticed they took most of the food, all spare ammunition, and the first aid supplies, leaving me with barely enough for 24 hours. As the helicopter lifted off, Michael waved frantically, his face a mask of concern. James made a show of talking angrily to Tanner. I waved back, smiling benignly like the trusting father they believed me to be. The moment they disappeared over the mountain ridge, I ransacked the camp, confirming my suspicions. They'd sabotaged everything that might ensure my survival. Water purification tablets replaced with similar-looking antacids, compass needles subtly bent to give false readings, emergency blankets sliced with nearly invisible cuts that would cause it to tear when needed. That night, as wolves howled in the distance and temperatures dropped toward freezing, I sat beside the dying campfire reading their text message again. My sons had researched the perfect murder, one where nature would be the weapon and their hands would remain legally clean. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd brought them here year after year to teach them survival. Instead, they'd learned how to weaponize wilderness against to the very man who taught them to respect it. Dawn broke with an unexpected storm, not the mild weather system predicted, but a vicious front that tore through the mountains with freezing rain and whipping winds. No helicopter could navigate such conditions, not that one was coming anyway. I abandoned the compromised camp, taking only what was truly useful. 6 miles into my trek, fighting against wind that threatened to topple my aging frame, I found it. A hunting blind constructed with familiar technique. Not for tracking game, but for watching me. My sons had built an observation post days before our arrival. Inside, sheltered from the worsening storm, I discovered damning evidence. An empty whiskey bottle from my private collection, energy bar wrappers, and a leather-bound notebook I'd given James for Christmas. Inside, written in his meticulous handwriting, survival odds for a 70-year-old male in various weather conditions, calculations of hypothermia onset times, probability charts for predator encounters, and a ghoulish countdown titled Days Until Presumed Dead. They had researched and plotted my death with the same methodical precision I'd taught them for business acquisitions. My legs gave way as the full weight of their betrayal crushed me. The sons I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid without question, whose first business ventures I'd financed despite knowing they would fail, had calculated the freezing point of my blood and the scavenging patterns of Alaskan predators. For the first time since Elizabeth died, I wept. Not gentle tears of sadness, but primal, wounded howls that echoed through the forest. I beat my fists against the blind's wooden floor until splinters embedded in my skin. I cursed their names to the indifferent storm. I raged against my own blindness, my pathetic trust, my failure to see the monsters I'd created. When exhaustion finally silenced my grief, something hardened within me, something cold and implacable that had remained dormant since my final days in the jungle. I tore the incriminating pages from the notebook and sealed them in a waterproof pouch. Evidence. Then I removed my wedding ring, the one connection to Elizabeth I never removed, and placed it for safekeeping in my breast pocket, next to my heart. "I'm coming back," I whispered to the storm, to the wilderness, to the sons who thought they'd condemned me to die. "And you will learn what it truly means to lose everything." That night, as temperatures plummeted and the storm intensified, I remembered my drill sergeant's words from basic training. "When you think you're going to die, get angry. Death hates angry men. They're too much trouble." For the first time in decades, I embraced that fury. Let it warm me when the cold threatened to shut down my peripheral circulation. Let it drive me when exhaustion demanded surrender. Let it focus my mind when despair whispered that death would be easier than the 60-mile journey ahead. I would not die in these mountains. Not when my sons were already dividing my possessions, already imagining their wealthy futures built upon my frozen corpse. Not when justice remained unserved. The storm abated by morning, leaving behind a treacherous landscape transformed by ice and fresh snow. At 70, under ideal conditions, covering 60 miles of wilderness would take at least a week. With compromised supplies, injuries, and terrain rendered deadly by the storm, the odds were astronomical against me. My military training asserted itself like muscle memory. I constructed a makeshift splint for my increasingly painful knee, used snow to clean the infected gash on my thigh, fashioned better insulation for my gloves and boots using materials from the hunting blind. I began documenting my journey with James's pen in the margins of his death calculations, a journal of survival where he'd written my obituary. On the second day of my trek, I encountered my first major obstacle, a river crossing made treacherous by recent rainfall. The bridge we'd used days earlier had been compromised, support beams partially sawed through. Not weather damage, deliberate sabotage. They had planned multiple fail-safes to ensure nature would kill me if exposure didn't. I fashioned a crude rope from my belt and bootlaces, using it to navigate across fallen logs. Halfway across, my grip faltered. The raging current caught me, smashing my body against submerged rocks before I clawed my way to the opposite bank. Soaked to the skin in near-freezing temperatures, I faced immediate hypothermia unless I found shelter. Desperation drove me forward until I discovered a shallow cave beneath an outcropping. There, shivering violently, I stripped off my wet clothes and wrapped myself in the emergency blanket that, predictably, tore along the sabotaged seams. Using the fire-starting kit I'd hid, and in my boot, a Vietnam habit my sons knew nothing about, I managed a small blaze that saved my life but consumed the last of my dry materials. By the fourth day, hunger became my constant companion. The trail rations my sons had generously left me had run out. I resorted to techniques I'd learned from indigenous fighters in Southeast Asia, digging for roots, trapping small game with primitive snares, chewing pine needles for vitamin C. Each successful meal was a victory against my son's calculations. On the fifth day, a grizzly caught my scent. I spent 6 terrifying hours in a tree, my damaged knee screaming in protest, watching the massive predator investigate my tracks. When it finally ambled away, I carved a notch into my walking stick. Another death sentence survived. The infected leg wound worsened despite my efforts. By day 6, fever set in. Chills racked my body as I stumbled through mountain passes, hallucinating Elizabeth walking beside me, her gentle voice urging me forward. "They're still your sons," her apparition whispered during a particularly bleak night. "No," I told the fever dream. "Sons don't calculate the market value of their father's corpse." Day 7 brought snow, unseasonal and deadly. I fashioned crude snowshoes from branches and strips of my jacket lining, sacrificing warmth for mobility. That night, temperatures dropped to 17 degrees. I dug a snow cave and huddled inside, certain I wouldn't see morning. I dreamed of my sons lounging in their luxury suite, toasting my death with expensive cognac, already spending my money. I woke with renewed determination, and something else. The distant sound of mechanical rotors. Not a rescue helicopter. Logging operations over the ridge. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself toward the sound, stumbling into a clearing as a crew of shocked lumberjacks spotted me. A blood-stained, frost-bitten apparition emerging from supposedly uninhabited wilderness. Their foreman radioed for emergency evacuation, while his men wrapped me in thermal blankets and poured hot coffee into my cracked lips. "How the hell did you get out here, old-timer?" one asked. "There's nothing for 50 miles. I simply shook my head, saving my strength. The truth would come later, when I had recovered, when I had justice within reach, when I could look into my sons' eyes as they realized their inheritance had returned to claim them. The rescue helicopter delivered me not to the nearest hospital, but at my insistence to a small medical clinic where I paid cash and gave a false name. Let my sons believe their plan succeeded. Let them celebrate prematurely. Let them begin dismantling my life while I prepared to dismantle theirs. From my anonymous hospital bed, I made 3 calls. To my lawyer, Sandra Voss, who had survived breast cancer with financial support from my foundation. To a private investigator named Marcus Reeves, a fellow Vietnam veteran who owed me for his rehabilitation after the war. And to my bank manager, instructing him to restrict access to my accounts pending potential fraud investigation. For 10 days I recovered in anonymity while Marcus documented my son's activities. No search parties organized, no missing persons report filed, no concerned calls to authorities. Instead, meetings with real estate agents about my properties. Inquiries to my investment manager about portfolio liquidation timelines. Visits to luxury car dealerships to place deposits on vehicles they couldn't yet afford. A consultation with a contractor about renovations to my home. Renovations they planned to begin before my body was ease. Then officially declared dead. Sandra prepared the legal artillery I would need. Evidence of conspiracy, attempted murder charges, emergency court orders freezing my assets. Marcus intercepted text messages between my sons and Tanner, discussing payment arrangements and ensuring their stories aligned for the inevitable questions. On the 11th day after my disappearance, I checked the obituary section of our local newspaper. There it was. My death notice, tastefully written, mentioning my tragic accident during an Alaskan expedition and my devoted sons who searched tirelessly for their beloved father. The funeral was scheduled for the following morning at St. Matthew's Cathedral, the same church where I'd married Elizabeth 45 years earlier. Perfect timing. St. Matthew's Cathedral stood magnificent in morning light, its stained glass casting colourful shadows across pews filled with business associates, distant relatives, and social climbers attracted to wealth even in death. My silver-framed portrait, the one from my office that Elizabeth had always hated, stood beside an empty casket adorned with lilies and roses. My sons had spared no expense for this performance. Michael, dressed in impeccable black, greeted mourners with practiced solemnity. James managed appropriate tears when required. Both accepted condolences with the perfect balance of grief and strength, as though they'd rehearsed this moment for years. Perhaps they had. The minister had just begun his eulogy. Richard Warren lived a life of extraordinary accomplishment when the cathedral's massive doors swung open. Leaning on a cane necessitated by my injured knee, I walked slowly down the center aisle. The congregation gasped collectively. Someone screamed. The minister dropped his Bible, and my sons, my murderous, inheritance-hungry sons, transformed before my eyes. Michael's face drained F-blood, his complexion matching his starched collar. James swayed, grabbing the pew for support, his rehearsed tears replaced by genuine shock. "Sorry to disappoint everyone," I announced, my voice echoing through the stunned silence, particularly my sons, who will be devastated to learn they won't be collecting their inheritance today. Chaos erupted. Mourners stood, uncertain whether to flee or approach. The minister crossed himself repeatedly. My sons remained frozen, trapped between the impossibility of my presence and the inescapable reality of their exposed plot. Security guards, veterans I'd quietly hired from my old unit, positioned themselves at each exit. Sandra Voss appeared beside me, distributing manila envelopes to key figures in the congregation, the district attorney, the family court judge, the executor of my estate. "Michael and James Warren aren't just disappointed heirs today," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "They're criminal suspects in a conspiracy to commit murder. They tried to run, predictable given their cowardice. The security team intercepted them before they reached the side door. They tried denial, claiming I was confused, suffering dementia just as they'd planned to tell authorities. They tried to paint themselves as concerned sons who'd been devastated by my disappearance. But evidence doesn't lie, and neither did Tanner when Marcus presented him with the choice between accessory charges or testimony against my sons. The guide confessed everything: the $50,000 payment to abandon me, the careful sabotage of my equipment, the promise of another $50,000 once my death was confirmed. In the cathedral's side chapel, away from the stunned congregation, I confronted my sons privately. They had been handcuffed by officers responding to Sandra's pre-arranged call, their designer suits incongruous with the steel restraints. "Why?" I asked simply, needing to hear it from their lips. "You were never going to die," Michael spat. His pracket, ticed charm evaporated. 70, 75, 80. You kept going while we waited. Do you know what it's like watching your inheritance locked away while you plan another decade of adventures? We built our lives around expectations," James added, more composed but equally venomous. "The businesses we wanted to launch, the investments we planned, all waiting on your death. You taught us to be strategic, to analyze opportunities. You were the opportunity that never materialized." I studied their faces, these strangers wearing my features, carrying my name, filled with entitlement rather than gratitude. I saw nothing of Elizabeth in them now, nothing of the boys who had once ridden on my shoulders or sought my approval. "Your inheritance," I said softly, "was never about money. It was about becoming men of character. That was what your mother and I tried to build. Not your bank accounts, but your souls." "Save the lecture," Michael snapped. "We've endured your disappointment our entire lives. Nothing was ever enough, not our grades, not our achievements, not our business proposals. You measured us against your impossible standards while dangling your fortune like a carrot. Perhaps there was a fraction of truth in his bitterness. Had I been too demanding? Had my attempts to instill character created resentment instead? Had I somehow cultivated this monstrous entitlement? The moment of self-doubt passed as I remembered the notebook calculations, the sabotaged equipment, the abandoned camp. Whatever my failings as a father, they had chosen attempted murder as their response. I didn't come here for reconciliation, I told them, as officers prepared to transport them to central booking. I came to deliver justice and your true inheritance. I instructed Sandra to announce the creation of the Elizabeth Warren Wilderness Survival Foundation. My entire fortune, every penny, property, investment, and future mineral right would fund wilderness rescue operations, survival training for disadvantaged youth, and rehabilitation programs for veterans. My sons would receive nothing except the knowledge that their father had survived their betrayal and that the fortune they killed for would save lives for generations after we were all gone. As they were led away in handcuffs, James looked back, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You always taught us to survive," he said, the words heavy with accusation. I nodded slowly. The lesson wasn't just about surviving the wilderness, son. It was about what's worth surviving for. If this incredible story of survival and justice moved you, please subscribe to our channel right now. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have found the strength to survive this betrayal? Would you have forgiven your children or sought justice as this father did? Let us know in the comments. I'm 72 now. The foundation has already funded 17 major rescue operations and established wilderness training programs in 6 states. The criminal case against my sons concluded with 15-year sentences, less than they deserved, but sufficient for justice. I haven't visited them. Some betrayals create chasms too wide for bridges. Sometimes I speak at schools about wilderness safety and the importance of integrity. I never mention my sons, though students occasionally recognize me from news coverage of the inheritance murder plot that fascinated the media for months. The foundation recently purchased the Alaskan hunting lodge where my sons had celebrated my presumed death. We've transformed it into a rehabilitation center for wounded veterans, men and women who understand that survival isn't merely about technique, but about purpose. I still go hunting, though never in Alaska. Sometimes, in the quiet of the forest, I think about what might have been. If Titi, hey, had waited. If they had loved me more than money. If they had understood that the true inheritance I wanted to leave wasn't measured in millions, but in the strength to face life's wilderness with honor. Elizabeth's wedding ring remains in my breast pocket, close to my heart. On difficult nights, I hold it and wonder if she would approve of my choices. The wealth that once divided our family now unites strangers in crisis. The sons we raised together now contemplate their crimes in separate prison cells. The love we shared now exists only in fading photographs and my increasingly unreliable memory. What would you do if the people you trusted most left you to die? Would you find the strength to crawl back from that abyss? And if you did, would you find it in your heart to forgive what I could not? The wilderness taught me I could survive anything, even the death of love, even the knowledge that to my own children, I was worth exactly $28 million, not a dollar more. But the greatest lesson came afterward. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, properties, or mineral rights. It's measured in the lives you touch, the values you uphold when tested, and the legacy you leave when your survival story finally reaches its end.